I got a sneak peek at some of her slides on her slide deck, so I know that this is going to be a wonderful, thought-provoking discussion. So let me welcome Dr. Ellen Clarke. It's great to have you today. I'm really excited to dive into this discussion. Before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to you being interested in brain health and all this.
Yeah, so my journey into this profession actually started when I was young. I had a grandmother who was very much involved with my life be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so watching her go through that and kind of that whole process really inspired me to want to do something positive in the space. And that ultimately led me to a PhD in what is essentially applied neuropsych. And while I was getting my PhD, I did a lot of kind of the initial work in the field of, um, cognitive interventions to help improve brain health for healthy aging. Then after school, I went and worked in industry with pretty much every government agency you can think of. I worked for them, including I did NIH, I was at DARPA, I was at NRL, you name it, I was there. And then eventually got to the point where I really wanted to get back to the subject that I was, most passionate about, which was helping older adults with their brain health. And so founded my company, Brain Evolved, because I just didn't see anybody else doing it the way I thought it should be done based on the work that we were doing in academia and in the government. So I just decided to take all that stuff that I had and try to bring it to the population and hopefully help a lot of people out. So that's
Wow,
how we got here.
this is great. And I know we'll dive deeper into that throughout our discussion, and we can learn more about your organization. But I think you've got some really interesting information to share that can help all of us. So what I'm going to do is duck behind the curtains here. And folks, I want to remind everybody that you just use chat or Q&A and type your questions in. And and then Dr. Clarke, if you want to just take a break, a few times during your discussion and check in with me. I'll let you know if there's any relevant questions.
Sounds good. All right. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the scientific findings and knowledge around how to ideally extend independent living, at least from a brain health standpoint. So advance a little fast on that one. So, I think for a long time, we've known that if we want to keep our bodies physically healthy and active, we need to keep up with a physical regimen. And now we know that the same is true for our brain health. And so that's what we're trying to do now is apply those techniques um, and bring those to everybody to be able to use in their everyday life. So if there's one thing that you take away from this discussion today, I want it to be that this specific type of training called multi-domain brain training is what is really key to extending those really good, meaningful, independent years. And so we're going to jump right into kind of why that is and the impacts of it. So here I have a graph with kind of cognitive ability on the vertical axis and age on the horizontal axis. And what you can see also is this kind of dark gray shaded area. And that is where somebody's cognitive abilities can fall at any point in time during their life based on their genetics. So there's quite a range. And where somebody falls is determined by their environment. So it's this gene environment interaction. And sometimes it's choices that we make, and sometimes it's kind of the hand that we were dealt, right? And so This red line on here represents the trajectory of a typical American. And the most important part of the graph isn't even on there yet. It's this blue flashing line here. And what this is the threshold for independence. So as long as you are above the threshold, you're able to live independently. Once you fall below the threshold, now you're going to require assistance and no longer be able to live on your own, at least for a cognitive standpoint. And again, if I didn't say this to begin with, this is for healthy aging. So this doesn't include dementias or any other type of neurodegenerative diseases. And so what you can see here is for this typical person, they're crossing this threshold around age 75, which is pretty sad. There's a lot of life to live after 75. So what we want to know is how can we kind of change the trajectory of this line, even if we're not able to start taking those active steps until later in life, and kind of push it out and give us some extra years. And so the good news is I wouldn't be here talking to you today if there wasn't something that we thought could be helpful. And that thing is multi-domain brain training. And when you look at this line here, this is somebody who started undertaking these techniques when they're around age 60. And of course, you can undertake them at any time. You just kind of adjust the slope of the line a little bit. But you can see this person is now crossing the threshold around 90. So 15 extra years, which is phenomenal. And so, of course, the next most important thing is what is multi-domain brain training? And I think the best way to start talking about multi-domain brain training is talking about what it is not. So a lot of people, when I first say brain training or brain fitness, the first thing that comes to mind is something like Lumosity. Now, Lumosity is an example of a singular domain approach to brain training. And so what that means is that they use one type of brain training to try to improve someone's brain fitness. So in their case, it's cognitive training games. And while there might be lots of different types of cognitive training games that are said to target specific areas or different areas of the brain, it's still just one type of intervention. They're all those cognitive games. And so that's a singular domain approach, and it's just not quite as effective, or it's not really close to as effective as the multi-domain approach. And so a multi-domain approach might use cognitive training games as a part of their program, but they're going to have a lot of other different types of interventions as well, and kind of synergize them into this holistic program. So the graph that I had on the previous page was from a review article that was kind of looking at what they thought could be possible, but looking at individual studies on the effectiveness of multi-domain brain training, I think also shows us a really nice, clear illustration of the potential impact of this type of training. So this graph here on the left with the yellow background is from a very famous study in the field. It's called the Finnish finger study. And if you were to go to the Alzheimer's Association's website right now, you would find a whole section dedicated and based around this Finnish finger study, because the results are just that substantial and that impactful. And what they did is they took a group of over 1,000 older adults that did not have a diagnosis of a dementia, and they gave them multi-domain training. And what they found is that the multi-domain training group had huge improvements in their brain fitness and brain health. So 25% improvement in overall cognition, 83% in executive function. And executive function, I'll talk about a little bit more later, but it basically is what we use it in our daily life, and it's what allows us to live our lives effectively. And then 150% improvement in speed of processing. And speed of processing is most often correlated with the daily task of driving. So this is usually a task that is very important for a lot of people to maintain their independence. So these are huge results, and very, very important. On the right, in the blue graph, this also looks at the importance of multi-domain training, or the potential effects of multi-domain training on those that do have a dementia diagnosis. So in this group, everybody was or had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so a very specific type of dementia. And what they did is they split everybody into four groups. One group, the blue group, they did nothing. The red group, they gave the kind of available medication at the time, which was Aricept. The yellow group, they did just multi-domain training, and the black group, they gave both the training and the medication. And what you can see is that when they started, when they took their first kind of measures of everybody's brain fitness, all the groups were basically the same. I know they're spread out a little bit, but if you ran the numbers, they're the same. But then when you look again at 1 and 2 years, the groups start to spread apart. And when you run the numbers, the statistically significant differences are between the group that did nothing and the groups that received the training. And so what this is saying is not that you shouldn't take your medication, you absolutely should, but the combination of the medication with the training, it can be hugely powerful. Are there any questions or comments on the studies or anything that I've talked about so far?
Yeah, we've got a question, but I'd like to hold it.
Okay.
It relates to SSRIs and anxiety, depression.
Okay.
But thanks for checking in and
Okay.
just a reminder, like as Dr. Clarke's going through this, if you got questions, throw them in there and if they're but we'll make sure that we get to them all at when she gets through the slide deck.
Great. So then the question becomes, how are we able to impart such significant and tremendous results when we're not tapping into the neuropharmaceutical area? And the reason is that we're taking advantage of this kind of key mechanism in the brain that we call neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to kind of change and adapt. And we used to think that at a certain point of time, you kind of lost this ability and the brain was kind of static or degrading. But now we know that that is not the case. The brain is constantly changing. And so if we're able to take advantage of this in the right way, then we can use it to kind of help boost some areas that might be becoming challenging for us. So as just a quick illustration of neuroplasticity, I put this image here on the screen, and I'm sure that within the first, few seconds of seeing this image, you knew exactly what it was. Now, this image is actually a famous image because it can be seen two ways. So most people, when they look at this, they see a duck, but it actually can also be seen as a rabbit. So let me point out how to see the rabbit. So now you've got the ears back here and the nose here. In case you did see the rabbit first, this is what the duck looks like. The ears become the bill and the nose becomes the back of the head. And so here they are side by side. And although you may have seen just one of these images when I first put the image on the screen, now that I've kind of pointed it out to you how to see the other one, you probably can see both. And so that's just a really quick illustration of how with some just simple training or instruction, the brain can be changed even in the visual category. So it's a pretty powerful tool that we have available to us. One other just quick side note that I like to put in about this particular image. So most people see the duck, but the closer in time that you are to Easter, the more people see the rabbit. So there's an interesting kind of priming effect with holidays here too, that this figure is used for, which is just a cool little study. So then this is also an illustration kind of neuroplasticity and that the brain changes, but as we go through the lifespan, there are specific areas of strength and challenge that are associated with each kind of age group. And they're general. There is variation in here, but these are general groupings. And this shows us really that it's not that we necessarily our brain's getting worse as we age. It's just changing. And the challenge areas become areas that are more difficult to allow us to remain with a certain level of independence. So when we look at the the young child, we see a strength in the area of speed of processing. And I'm sure anybody who's spent any time with a small child knows that, they pick up things really, really quickly, right? They're learning language, they're learning how to read, they're learning math, all these things, and they pick it up so, so fast, right? However, they also have a challenge area, which is attention. It's hard to get a kid to sit still for more than like 30 seconds at a time. So although they can learn rapidly, they kind of have to because they can't sit still for very long. Um, but then when we look at our 55 plus, generally the strength is in an area we call crystallized intelligence. And crystallized intelligence is just kind of a fancy word for saying wisdom. So it's the knowledge of the world around us and how to best interact with it. Now, the challenge area is why we start to see such issues, because the challenge area becomes generally this area we call executive function, which is a broad cognitive process, which means it impacts a lot of things. It can be thought of anything involving strategy, planning, or multitasking. So think about, you're making dinner and the phone rings. And even if you hit ignore on the phone call, you still took a break from making the dinner to address the phone call, and then you're trying to return back to making the dinner. And that generally things like that become more difficult as we age. And this is just general, right? Every person is a little bit different. And so it's important to know, kind of what your specific strengths and challenges are. Questions so far on this part?
Sorry, had to get my mic. No, I think this is really good. I'm sure that some questions will pop up during the discussion, but
Okay.
thank you. Thank you.
Good. So, whenever you're wanting to undertake a kind of a brain health program, the first and most important thing to do is to understand what your particular strengths and challenge areas are so that you can get the training plan that's going to best help you. And so the first step is always to identify what those are. And then when we talk about, a multi-domain brain training program, I've got an example here of one that can be adapted kind of based on those different areas, but the general structure remains the same. So in this case, we've got a physical intervention, a social intervention, a stress relief, and a mental, which are those cognitive training games. And I'll talk about each one in a little bit more detail, but this is just a nice example of a multi-domain brain training program. And this program in particular, I can say these are the exact kinds of results that people experience when this program is used. So we're talking about, again, you're seeing that those huge change benefits, 300%, 100%. You also notice that this person had a very high measure on intelligence. They were a 10 out of a 10 at the start and the end. So this is also to illustrate that these multi-domain programs are not taking from your strength to boost your challenge. They're not, spreading resources around. They're creating new strengths and benefits to your brain fitness. And even more importantly than the numbers, people report, huge improvements in quality of life as well when they undertake these. This person says that they were much less overwhelmed. They had previously enjoyed putting on social gatherings, happy hours, book clubs, and things like that. But, just found themselves feeling like that was too overwhelming. But after the program, able to do it no problem, and we're back to enjoying it again. Also, less brain fog and just more confidence in their everyday tasks that they could accomplish what they wanted to for the day. So to go through each of the different types of interventions so you can get an idea of kind of what the different interventions themselves look like. The first one is physical exercise. And if I had to choose, one intervention to do, if I was only going to do one, it would be physical exercise. Of course, you have to be cleared by a physician in order to do it, which makes it tricky. But this is the one that has the most science and support behind it. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but that's what it is. And so if I had to choose one, it would be this one. But like I said, it's difficult because you have to be cleared by a physician in order to engage in physical activity, and that becomes more difficult as we age. There are also a lot of different types of physical exercise. So how do you know which type is going to help the most. And then there's often an issue with motivation around engaging in physical exercise. It's not everybody's favorite thing to do. So that's another big barrier. But when we talk about kind of what an ideal exercise program would look like, it would be something that combined both physical exercise and mental exercise at the same time. Now, it is also very important that this is done correctly, because you wouldn't think that it would be that big of a deal to add a little, brain training into your physical exercise. It actually puts a large stress on your brain, and so you have to make sure that it's all balanced out correctly, because if it's not, instead of seeing huge benefits, you're not really going to see much of anything because you basically maxed everything out. So that is careful. You have to be very careful around that. And then motivation. It's difficult to find ways to motivate ourselves to continue exercising, even after we've identified what we think is the best avenue for us. How do we keep going with that? And we have a couple of ideas around it. We like to recommend that people use an exercise buddy, kind of like an accountability partner there, whether that's a person or an animal. We have a lot of clients that have furry friends that, they need to be walked every day. And so it really encourages them to get out and get at least a little bit of exercise every day. Also rewards, whether that's something like, a smoothie, or even, saving your favorite podcast or your favorite playlist or songs for when you're exercising only. Some people are competitive. So, whether that's being competitive with your neighbor across the street, or there are lots of different apps out there with little competitive elements to them that can let you engage a bigger population. We also encourage people to set manageable goals. And so achieving those goals helps keep you motivated. And then just trying out different types of exercise. It doesn't have to be the same all the time. And so then our next element is the cognitive training games. And so these are kind of the newest area of research. And so when you're looking at a cognitive training game, what you want to see is that it's challenging the right areas for you, but it also takes advantage of your strengths. And then also important is to make sure that it's fun and engaging, because if it's not fun and engaging, you're not going to do it. So making sure that it's a game that you like to play, just because someone else likes to play it doesn't mean that you like to play it. So finding one that works for you, is going to be critical. So just a reminder that, and we're going to evaluate a couple of potential games so that you can see what an evaluation would look like if you were, out in your daily life and trying to decide whether this game was a good fit for you. In general, our strength areas for our 55 plus are that crystallized intelligence, that wisdom. So our example here is getting out ingredients for a favorite dish. And our challenge area is executive function, strategy, planning, multitasking. So that's making dinner and the phone rings and trying to switch back and forth between the two tasks. So I have 4 games here that we get asked about a lot. Crossword puzzles, a video game, something like Mario, bridge, and this game called Words in a Word, which we see a lot in kind of senior centers and senior living communities, where they'll put a big word up on the board and you have to figure out all the different small words that come out of it. So the one on here, the word is pedestrian, and you can get words like rest and depart and, things like that out of it. But when we analyze them, what we find is that when we're looking specifically at crossword puzzles, which is probably the number one question that I get asked, I get people coming up to me and saying, "Well, I feel good about my my brain game aspect because I do the New York Times crossword every day." Unfortunately, for most older adults, that's not going to be a really effective brain game. It can have kind of a relaxing, stress relieving effect, which is another aspect of our multi-domain program. But in terms of a brain game, it kind of misses the mark for most older adults because crossword puzzles really tap into crystallized intelligence. So, you're going through that Rolodex in your head, trying to figure out what word that could be. Whereas in terms of strategy, planning, multitasking, very little involved with the crossword puzzles. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, and it's also because it's high in crystallized intelligence, which is something that most older adults are good at. That's also, why a lot of people like them. We tend to like the games that are not that we're good at, and so it makes a lot of sense that crossword puzzles are very popular. The Mario game. So I included this one because it's a nice example of a kind of a computer or a video game that most people are familiar with. Even though I have to say, I don't get a lot of clients that are actively playing it, but so it's very high again in crystallized intelligence. You really just have to get from point A to point B and kind of avoid the bad guys on the way, and low in terms of strategy and planning. Um, Bridge is another one we get a lot. Bridge has a nice social aspect to it too, which we like. And of the ones listed, Bridge is kind of the best of the ones there. It's got a little bit of crystallized intelligence, which is going to help you. It's going to lend itself more to be something that you would like to do. And then executive function, kind of a mid-level. So Bridge is of the four up there. It's the best choice for these two specific challenge and strengths. When we look at word in a word, again, we're looking more like a crossword puzzle, right? You're searching through the Rolodex for the words, not a lot of strategy and planning involved. Any questions on those first?
Yeah, and actually, this a good there's a bunch of questions, and we'll get
Okay.
to these. But I like this one because one of our last speakers was asking, and it's Marianne asks, where does learning a new language fits in? Is that beneficial? And is it viewed as a game? I know I use Duolingo, and it's very much a game. But
Yeah.
but what are your thoughts on learning a new language?
Yeah, so I mean, Duolingo does a great job of gamifying the process of learning a language, but there's a lot of studies on bilingualism and learning a language, and that is kind of this new process of learning. And there's a lot of challenges, and it exercises a bunch of different parts of the brain. So it is something that can be very beneficial in terms of keeping your brain kind of fit and healthy as you age.
Okay, great. And Coilith says, I'm relieved to see that most of the brain games are not really effective for executive function where I need improvement because I find these games boring. So
Perfect. Great.
yeah. So okay, we've got tons of things, tons of questions. We'll get to them all. I'll let you keep on going, but feel free to take another break and check in.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the next area in that kind of multi-domain group that we were looking at was stress relief. And so stress relief is hugely important. And it's kind of overlooked sometimes, but it's hugely damaging to the whole body, including the brain. And so most of the work that's been done on stress relief that can be applied to a lot of the population is around mindfulness and breath work. However, finding something that is stress relieving is a very individual thing. And so mindfulness and breath work works for, a big portion of the population, but this again is something kind of variable and personal. So it's also, one of the key things about stress is knowing when we are stressed so that we can kind of apply techniques to help us, ameliorate some of that stress. And so, I always like to point out different ways that stress can present so that going forward, when people notice these things, either in themselves or in others, it's a good indicator to kind of take action. So one of the, kind of the typical one is mood swings, right? Somebody snapping at you, right? So this popular on social media these days, but like mom getting ready for a big party and she's, snapping at all the kids to do all the things and everyone just tries to stay away, right? She's stressed. Um, Kind of the opposite of that is somebody who's isolating or withdrawing. So some people, when they get stressed out and overwhelmed, they withdraw. Um, and then we look into changes in sleeping and eating. So this can be either side of the spectrum. So with sleeping, we can be sleeping too much. Again, that's somebody who is, avoiding withdrawing, or somebody who's not sleeping at all. Their mind's racing at night, so they can't fall asleep, or it's, they keep waking up. Um, Eating also, both sides of the spectrum. There's stress eating where, it's kind of like a binge eating. Or there's, restricted eating or less eating, for a variety of reasons. And then there's also different physical manifestations. Stress can manifest physically in so many different ways. And so it's good to learn for yourself where your stress typically manifests. It can be anything from, headaches, back pain, stomach aches, even chest pain. You might think there's no way stress could be causing this, but in fact, stress is wild. It can cause a lot of different physical manifestations. Also, of course, if you're having any physical issues, make sure you get it checked out and don't just write it off as stress right away, but it's good to know. And then last, and of course not least, is increased issues with brain health or brain power, brain fitness. I have had quite a few people who've come up, feel like they're having, they've noticed significant changes in their memory or something like that, and then come to find out they have a huge stress burden in their life. And once we're able to kind of get them on a better path in terms of their stress, wouldn't you know it, their brain health improves dramatically. So the next and kind of the last aspect of this multi-domain program that we're talking about is socialization. Now, socialization is something I used to have to talk a lot more about before the pandemic, but post-pandemic and lockdown and all that, people are much more aware of the importance of socializing and the damage that being less social than we would like to, and what the impact is on our mental health and our cognitive health. So when we're looking at socialization, face to face is great, but don't shy away from taking advantage of technology. Either technology is a great way to get social interaction, especially for somebody who maybe doesn't feel slightly uncomfortable or has limitations in terms of getting out and about. And then third, I like socialization too because it's an area where everybody can help everybody. So and that benefits both parties. And so one of the classic examples of socialization is eating a meal together, and that was severely impacted by the pandemic. A lot of restaurants were shut down. If they were open or if they eventually did reopen, it was outdoor dining only for a while. A lot of the senior living communities shut their dining halls down. And so it just became, it was one of the things that was happened to be most impacted by the pandemic. And socializing while eating, particularly for older adults, has huge impacts, which is very interesting. And the research shows that socializing while you're eating, particularly if you're with people that you like, like your friends and family, you're more likely to eat more and be healthier. And for a lot of the older adult population, intake or increasing intake is an issue. And so this helps with that. And then I talked a little bit about how we can help each other out here with the socializing. And this is why. So socialization becomes a paradox for a lot of older adults because a lot of times when people start to feel like or notice that there is a change in a way that they don't like with their cognitive health or their brain health, they withdraw because of embarrassment or just not being sure about things. And so they'll tend to withdraw. Unfortunately, what that does is leads to more brain health issues. And it just kind of cycles. And so what we want to do is break this cycle. So if we see somebody that we notice all of a sudden is staying inside, not coming out, we want to do what we can to kind of encourage them to come along. And of course, not make a big deal out of, any mental slip ups or anything that they might have that might be deemed as or thought of as stigmatizing or making them feel bad. Because yeah, just getting them out and socialized is going to help a lot. And then I have a couple of other pillars, but is there anything on the last two?
Let's just get through this and
Okay.
then we got a pile of questions.
Okay.
We'll
Okay. I'll just keep going.
Okay.
Okay. So a couple of other pillars that people talk about a lot, but aren't part of this multi-domain program because they're a little bit tricky to put into a big program. Diet is one of them. Diet is tricky because obviously people have a lot of different dietary restrictions for a lot of different reasons, especially as we age. However, I did want to talk about it because I get a lot of questions about like, well, I heard, that this food or this vitamin or this supplement is great for brain health. And I got to say, like, there's something that comes out about that every week. And the only consistent thing that we've found is around on a whole diet. And that diet is the Mediterranean diet. And there's also a version of it called the Mind diet, which is the Mediterranean diet kind of like supercharged for brain health. It's a fairly easy one to do. It's so when you look at an American plate, you'll see, the main portion is meat and then small sides of kind of starch and vegetables. And the Mediterranean diet is just the reverse of that. So that big portion is going to be fruits and vegetables, and then small portions of the meat. So it's not that it's not the worst diet in the world to try to adapt to. But of course, you don't want to undertake a new diet unless it works with your physical health and your physician. And then the other one is sleep. And so sleep is tricky because there can be a lot of reasons that somebody's having issues with sleep. And over 50% of adults age 55 plus have some kind of sleep issue. And so when attacking the issue of sleep, it should really be a joint effort with the physician. Because you want to look at different medical conditions could be causing issues with sleep and medications themselves. And then of course there's pain and how to deal with that pain. The multi-domain approach can help. It can help where sometimes sleep issues are caused by lack of exercise or bad sleep habits, stress, and socialization. And so multi-domain can tap all of those things, but it kind of needs to work in tandem with the physician to address any underlying physical issues that might be going on. And so that is kind of each individual intervention. But I want to stress that the multi-domain approach doesn't work piecemeal. So you can't just do, I'm going to do some cognitive games this week, and then, next week I'm going to exercise and maybe I'll socialize a couple of times. It doesn't really, it's not really super effective when it's done that way. What really needs to be done is to take this comprehensive, integrative approach where you're really being mindful and thoughtful about the amount of time and resources that are dedicated to these things and that they're working together. And I know that sounds like a lot of effort, but the results really do speak for themselves. And so I think it's, obviously I think it's worth the effort. This is again a nice illustration of the impact that these kinds of programs can have. These are older adults. And the gray backgrounds are ones that have no history of any kind of neurological issue. The yellow is somebody with a history of stroke, and the purple is somebody in early stage Alzheimer's. And what you can see is that across the board, these people are showing huge improvements in terms of percentages, regardless of whether they were, they didn't have an existing condition or they did. And that it is very targeted on what they needed to focus on. That being said, of course, we look down here at our early stage Alzheimer's, and we started with a 1, we ended with a 2. There's still a lot of work to be done, but 100% improvement is 100% improvement. So we're glad we're headed in the right direction. And now also, as much as it might seem like a lot of work, I also want to say that those results that I showed, these were with people that were just all they were dedicating was a little over 10 minutes a day, 76 minutes a week outside of the socializing. So it is actually a very manageable thing to do as long as you set aside the time and the management to do it. And again, so the take home message, and hopefully now everybody knows what multi-domain brain training is, and that it can add a lot of great independent years. And that's it. Questions?
Okay, all right. We do have questions, okay? And
Okay.
I will start running through these. I know some of them are going to be they might be out of the scope of your training, and that's okay. Just, hey, I'm not sure I know the answer, and we can share your email. Folks can email me. We've got other folks that talk about dementia and brain training
Yeah.
and things of that nature. Okay. Lynn asks, many older adults use SSRIs for anxiety and depression, statin drugs for high cholesterol, Prolia, and other drugs for osteoporosis all increase risk of dementia. How can these be addressed in maintaining our brain health?
Yeah, so I mean it's really tough, and the medication issue with older adults is very difficult. So it's something that needs to be addressed directly with the physician. And we do a series on the medication management, and we talk about the prescription cascade and how multiple medications, and you're taking a medication for one thing and that has a side effect, and so then you got to treat for the side effect, and how to get that kind of more manageable for you. But yeah, it's a very tricky problem, and it's a very real problem for a lot of older adults. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then and I think what's great about your program is it's another non-medicine
Yeah,
program.
we're trying not to contribute to the number
Yeah.
of side effects and everything. So and it's super effective. So why not?
All right. Okay. Christina says, and this was a question I had too. To what extent is the multidimensional training effective for individuals who've already experienced some degree of dementia? I understand it depends a lot how the dementia has progressed, but is there any research or details on that?
Yeah, so with my program, we've only done early stage, and I showed an example of that where, we can show significant improvement. Um, it's still not curing dementia or anything like that. And then the study that I showed, those people, it was over a 2-year course, so they were progressing through Alzheimer's. And that's a specific type of multi-domain training. So you would want something that's geared towards people with Alzheimer's. It's different types of interventions than what we use for early stage or healthy.
Okay, great. And then Nancy, and there's several questions I see in chat on this, is that Nancy asks, what are some brain games that help increase executive function? And this might also be a good time because when I shared your website, I saw that you have a program that people can sign up for, and it looks like there is some analysis in this, that, and the other. So maybe can you answer Nancy's question about what are some of the brain games, and then maybe give us a glimpse of what people can get if they reach out to you and initiate your program.
Yeah. So in terms of the games that tap executive function, there are some that are not marketed as, brain health games, but are. We looked at these in some of the work that I did. There's one called Rise of Nations. It's like an empire building game. The only issue with this, with a lot of these games that are strategy and executive function based, is they tend to not be targeted towards older adults, and so it's not always their favorite thing to do, and sometimes they're just not older adult friendly. They don't make accommodations for
Yeah,
size or
this
things like.
one, yeah, this looks like something that kids would play.
Yeah. And so, I mean, people played it for us as part of our study, but I don't know that any of them went home and continued to play afterwards. We did another one that the name is slipping me now, but it was used to train Israeli fighter pilots. And
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's just like, kind of like a radar screen. Um, and so these are highly effective, but they're not super engaging. And so, yeah, we offer, cognitive training games that target executive function as part of our multi-domain program. And so, yeah, we definitely have those. And there are other, if you're looking just for cognitive training games, there are other companies that make those. If I was going to pick a company that has just cognitive training games, I would look at something like Brain HQ. They have a lot of science-backed work that goes behind their stuff, and we also evaluated their games back in the day as well.
Okay, yeah, and actually we're gonna have Henry Meineke on. We've had him before, but he's
Yeah,
gonna be on here shortly. But
yeah.
okay, so let's we'll get to the rest of the questions, but I want to get to so tell us a little bit about what you offer and how that works for folks.
Yes, so we offer a multi-domain training approach to brain health. And so if somebody is interested, what we do is we start with that comprehensive assessment, and then we follow that up with a training period. It's usually around 12 weeks. And then we finish up with another comprehensive assessment to see how it goes. And then there are kind of periodic check-ins and booster training and stuff after that. And so if you're interested, you just go to our website, click the learn more button and click individual if you're an individual, and then let us know and we'll reach back out to you and help put you into the most appropriate group.
Okay, and then you told me before we started this that you can, and I'm sort of filling out the form as an
Yeah,
individual here,
yeah,
and the if you reference in this little comment button,
yes.
positive aging discussion, if you end up being a paid member, then you'll extend a discount.
Yeah, there's a 20% discount if you mention your name or mention the pro aging in
Yeah.
the comment box or at any time to us. We'll do the 20% discount. And for those two assessments in the 12 weeks of training, it's 120 for that set plus the 20% discount.
Wow, and that's 120 is just like that's not like a monthly fee, that's just a
No, it's
okay.
120 for the 12 weeks and the two assessments. And we do discussions weekly on brain health topics. So
Hmm.
it's a great time and you get to learn a lot. So
Well,
it's good for a lot of reasons.
you know
Expanding your
what?
education and your health.
I filled out the form and signed up for that.
Yeah,
So I think I'm going to go through and do it with you.
you should.
It seems realistic, and then we can maybe I'll come back on and I can talk about the experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's definitely sounds worth my while.
Awesome.
Okay. Coila says, are you going to talk more about what constitutes an assessment, like getting tested by a neuropsych specialist, brain scan, or other tests?
Yeah. So when I'm talking about assessments, I'm generally talking about a behavioral assessment. So not any kind of scans. Scans are more used for diagnostics, is kind of how they run in terms of being effective for that. I don't think it's necessary to do anything other than the you know the standard behavioral assessments. You just want to make sure that they're standard. And this is one other thing I want to point out. When you're looking at brain training programs and you're taking assessments like pre and post, make sure that they're not testing you on the same things you're training on, right? Because what does that tell you? It tells you that you're getting better at the games you're playing. You want to make sure that the testing is actually, testing something separate from your practice effect.
Okay, great. Okay, and okay, now Kathleen says, could you please speak about the large recent multivitamin study that has been in the news? It is now adequately proven to take a is it now adequately proven to take a multivitamin daily for brain health? I was a bit skeptical of the study since the vitamins that since it was by the vitamins were donated by Centrum.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I
Yeah,
think I heard that
yeah,
somebody I like you said earlier, I feel like every week now there's some study
yeah.
related to Alzheimer's and brain health.
Yes, and we did get a lot of inquests or inquiries about this one in particular. And yeah, so much like this person mentioned, the study was, had some funding from the vitamin companies, event vitamin manufacturers. And so for that reason, it is considered biased. And when you look at the metrics, what you find is that the individual studies did not find a difference, but when they kind of analyzed them all together, then they started to find a difference. So it's it's a little dicey still in the scientific community whether that's a legit thing that we would hang our hats on.
Okay, great.
I don't think multivitamins are bad for you, but I
No,
don't know if
no,
it's the magic pill either.
yeah. And Katie says, is this beneficial for those uh, with Parkinson's that have not yet been diagnosed with dementia? Is there evidence of prolonging dementia in these individuals? Um,
I'm not sure I'm as qualified to talk about is the combination of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and the impacts of this. Parkinson's also becomes a little bit difficult. You'd have to have a targeted or a very specific type of intervention because a lot of this is software based, and with the movement, it can be a little bit tricky.
okay, but good to know. Rachel asks, will Medicare, Medicaid help pay for this multi-domain training program? That would be wonderful if it did, but I'm really impressed with the pricing that you've set on
Yeah,
it. It
yeah.
seems pretty affordable.
Yeah, I mean, we try our best. Like our mission is to make better brain health achievable for everyone. So, I mean, obviously we have operating costs to cover, but we're trying to make this something that everybody can do. And I sure wish that Medicare and Medicaid would start covering stuff like this, but because it is kind of this newer stuff, it's been being, we've been doing it in academia for I don't know, a decade now. But or more than that actually. But government's just a little slower to catch up and to get insurance and Medicaid on board. Something that I know we're working towards, and the cognitive training game companies are working towards it too. Lumosity, Brain HQ, they're all trying to get
Yeah.
these companies on board.
Compensation. Now, one of the things I noticed when you click the learn more button, it
Mm-hmm.
enables you to, are you an individual or a business? But like, for example, one idea could be like a senior living community
Mm-hmm.
might work with you, and then not only could they offer this to their residents that live in the community, but it could be like a offer it to prospects, people that,
Yes.
hey, look, have you started forming relationships like that that might you utilize this training in a similar way?
Yeah, so we have worked with senior living communities, and we have had some that are interested in opening it up to the wait list or prospects, because it's a nice way to keep them connected to the community, especially because we do these weekly discussions, so they start to kind of get to know
Oh, that's
the
great too.
residents
Okay.
and form those social bonds before they actually move in, which is a
All
great way
right.
to keep people engaged.
Okay, I got through all the questions. Now I'm going to
Okay.
go through the comments. Okay.
Okay.
And I just noticed that we've been on for an hour.
Mhm.
Folks, reminder, this is recorded, but Dr. Clarke, are you cool hanging on and we'll get through
Yeah,
these and then
absolutely.
yeah, this is very interesting. Okay, Virginia asks what when to start medication. This was early on in the discussion. I think
Mhm.
you were talking about some medications. I don't know if you can remember a reference.
Um, So I think when I was talking early on, I was talking about a study where they gave some people Aricept as part of a dementia study and looking at the difference between medications and cognitive training. I'm not sure. I because I deal in healthy aging mostly. I don't know when is the most appropriate time to start
Okay.
medication. I assume for dementia.
All right. And then Rhonda asks, are you familiar with the Stronger Memory program from Goodwin Living? Is that a tool that you would recommend? And what are examples of ways to combine physical and mental exercise at the same time? And if you're not, folks, I'll drop this into chat, but this is another program that we spotlighted here on our discussions called Stronger Memory. Are you familiar with that program?
I am. I am. I have spoken with them. And so their program is nice in that it is easily accessible. But that being said, it is more difficult. Their worksheets, it's difficult to kind of keep up with it. And I'm not familiar on the kind of efficacy support in science or what they've actually found.
Okay,
But
great. But it's
yeah,
cool because it's free.
yeah,
I mean,
it's easy. You just print
you're
it
doing
out.
something,
Yeah,
and they also have, I think, have found that the collaboration between
yeah.
doing it as a group or with friends is also good. And
Yep, that
then,
socialization is key.
yeah, now the other example about combining physical and mental exercises,
Hmm.
um,
Oh, was there a
examples.
question about it or just what the
Yeah,
example?
yeah. Just what are some ways that you can combine physical and mental exercises?
So, kind of the way that we do it, is we do a period of physical exercise followed by a recovery period during which you do the cognitive exercises. So kind of like when you're taking your breaks, doing a little bit of cognitive training in between. Kind of primes the exercise primes the brain for the training, and then the training kind of solidifies the exercise effect. So it's a nice synergistic harmony as opposed to kind of trying to do them simultaneously. That becomes a little bit challenging, especially when we're looking at older adults and fall risks and things like that.
Yep. Okay, great. And Coila says for exercise, I love my two Zoom classes, Fitness 55 and Kwaijon. Doing classes with others online is very motivating, especially with daily encouragement of the teachers. Yeah. And the cool thing is like everything that people are mentioning, and like there's another question from Rhonda. What about Sudoku and Karuko? Would they be more effective for executive function? The cool thing is, folks, all of these things are positive. Like all these
Yeah.
suggestions that y'all are bringing up are very positive. Whether they are medically proven to improve our brain fitness, I guess, is the question.
Right, right. And then with something like Sudoku, it is that has is a little bit better than something like crosswords, a little bit more strategy involved. We actually use a version of it, kind of a modified thing in ours. So there's a way to make it,
Okay, cool.
more targeted.
Margie says, I do all the New York Times brain games every day, a variety of things, including comparing shapes, matching part of them, hoping that that's helpful. And I think it's not unhelpful. I think those are number one, self-esteem, accomplishing something, this, that, and the
Mhm.
other. But what are your thoughts on some of those?
Yeah, so I mean, and I'm not familiar exactly with all of them are, but if it involves strategy, it's going to be good. If it doesn't, that's okay. It's still it's something you enjoy doing. It's stress relieving. That's going to be helpful, and so that's good. When we're looking at games, yeah, it's about a combination. So.
Yep. Um, Sanjay Gupta, Emily says, Sanjay Gupta, keep sharp. It says it's learning and doing something new that is best, a language, playing an instrument, etc. Yeah, I find that too, is that when it's scary to do something new sometimes, especially
Yeah.
if it's in a group, but when we get used to doing something new and we're always challenging ourselves, but I think you've sort of addressed a very important component. It's sort of the strategy. It's the real kind of um, thinking is more helpful for that exercise.
Yeah, targeting that specific challenge area for one person.
Yvette asks, is there any data regarding adults with ADHD, their cognitive decline relative to neurotypical population, and two, effects of the multi-domain brain training on this population. Have you uncovered any research or studies in that area? It seems like ADHD is something that is heavily diagnosed these days.
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar, particularly in the older adult population with ADHD. It is much less common with the older population. The younger is a little bit different. My oldest son actually has ADHD, and I don't have a program for children, but he definitely gets my modified version at home. So, there are different ways to kind of address it, and I know that there are different companies that look at that, but I'm just not that familiar
Okay.
with that research.
Um, this is kind of interesting. Chatira says, what about jigsaw puzzles for cognitive training? It seems to me like jigsaw puzzles does have a little bit of strategy involved in it in terms of finding the pieces and getting them put together.
A little bit. We also the jigsaw puzzle is nice for kind of that motor dexterity component too, and kind of keeping those connections active. But it depends a lot on the individual. We have a version that's kind of like a puzzle, also because it's popular, and it can be modified so that it really amplifies the strategy aspects of
Okay.
the puzzle.
And then Linda asks, what are the age ranges? In your earlier slide, you only said that the wisdom stage begins at age 55. Was there any published measure of cognitive drops that occurred during the years 2021 through 2023, likely due to the COVID lockdowns? Well, Linda, I love our audience, man. They really
Yeah.
come up with they're paying attention too. These folks are
Yeah.
in strategy, yeah.
Mhm.
But can you comment on that, Linda's
Yeah.
question?
So the impacts of the pandemic on cognition and mental health and cognitive health have been unanticipated and, not necessarily the best. And so there are indicators that there was a more rapid decline through those years, and kind of working to offset that now. But I don't know, in terms of like shifting a whole age bracket, I don't know if we can say that right now.
Okay, great. And yeah, I see we're moving, to an hour and 10 minutes here. I'm going to try to get through some of these. Okay, a couple of things. Some folks asked about, could we share the PowerPoint? Can you
Mhm.
send that to me and I'll put it on the recording link?
Sure.
Also, this is recorded. Also, I'll have all of these chat messages on there. I'll have Dr. Clarke's contact info. Is it okay to share your email?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. The and then Alice says we might be interested in using some of your study results.
Mhm.
Um, take a look at Outstanding Life. I'll make sure that she gets that.
Okay.
The trainings, like the gatherings that you have, are
Uh-huh.
those on Zoom or are they in person?
Yeah, so for kind of those weekly meetings, they're done either in Zoom or in person. It depends on kind of the locations. If we have a lot of people in one location, then we can do one in person. Otherwise, they're done virtually, especially if we're in a community. We usually offer in person and virtual. So
Okay.
it depends.
Cool. And then I'll make this our last one. Dixie says, very good information. I'm 70 and I have a 97-year-old mother. So this is very
Mhm.
interesting to me. And, I could see where
Great.
where I'm excited to test drive your program. Like I said, I mean, it can't hurt me. I mean, it's positive that it's and then I'll be able to sort of share some insights. So I'm
Yeah,
really excited about this. So
great.
folks, Ellen, thanks so much. Doesn't surprise me that we had such a big turnout on this topic and that we went over an hour. But I'll make sure to get this recording up, lickety split, and then we'll look forward to follow up with you. And again, thank you to everybody for sharing this. But I really want to commend you on what one of the things that I like about what you shared with us is the like it all has a science-based academic uh like we were talking about the study that is done by the vitamin company. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I can trust your data. And then the fact that you've created a platform based on that data gives me confidence. And,
Great.
so
Gives me confidence too. So it's
yeah,
good.
absolutely. So, all right, folks, we'll talk to you in the next one, and thanks a lot.
All right.
Somebody just said your website. I'm just gonna put that again. If you missed it, it's
Yeah.
Brain Evolved is the website. BrainEvolved.com. It's in the chat now. And thanks, Janet, for that reminder. And we will see you all at the next